we go. All right. Here comes everybody. Hi, welcome. Welcome to our 30-day practice challenge at Harp Column. I am Kimberly Rowe, and Allison Reese, who is usually here with us, couldn't be here today, but we also have Liana Alpino here from Harp Column. Liana is the managing editor at Harp Column Music and helps us get all our music online. So she knows a lot about what we have for sale. And we have two very special guests with us today. We have Kristan Toczko and Elizabeth Steiner, and we'll introduce each one of them a little bit more in depth in just a second. But if you're a reader of Harp Column, you probably know that last year in 2025, we featured freelancers. We talked to a lot of people who are just doing really interesting things with their careers and kind of thinking outside the box with the harp. And each of our two guests today were featured in an interview with Harp Column in 2025. So I'm going to start by introducing Kristan Toczko. And Kristan is a Canadian harpist. She is is it fair to say you're a viral social media star? I think
Sure.
that's fair
I'll
to
take
say.
it.
She has this. I cannot believe this, but Kristan has nearly 3 million followers on TikTok. So that's huge. I really cannot even believe that. And or I think you have over 600,000 followers on Instagram. And that's really how you've made a niche for yourself, even though you are originally a classically trained harpist.
hmm
But so thank you for joining us today, Kristan. And we wanted to
Cool.
just ask you some questions about the
Of
practice challenge. And today,
course.
our tool of the day is keeping a journal, a practice journal,
hmm
which is something I have to confess I'm not very good at this at all. But I know it is a very useful tool. And when we were talking before we let people in, you said that you do use a practice journal. Would you like to tell us a
hmm
little bit more about that?
So this is my practice journal. It's really cute with little birds on it because, if you're going to be writing something, you want it to look and feel nice. So I utilize practice journals. I'm gonna be honest, I don't use them all the time. It really depends what I have on the go. I ended up using a practice journal mainly when I was in the orchestral audition circuit, just because I had so much repertoire to get through. I needed a way to keep track of everything I was practicing and making sure I was on a rotation of going through everything within a span of 48 hours. So it was a really good way of setting goals, mini goals for myself for each day, making sure that I write down like what I practiced, how long I practiced it for, notes for myself, being like, okay, well, this thing was so-so today. So like next day, I'm going to try and get better at the X, Y, Z. Um, I also encourage all my students to keep practice journals, especially if it's a motivational reason. I find when we set mini goals for ourselves, it makes it a little bit easier to achieve what we want for that next day. It's kind of like instead of having that weekly harp lesson with your teacher keeping you accountable every week, it's like you can keep your own self accountable every day that you sit down. So, yeah, that's my practice journal. I really like it. I think it's an amazing tool in the practice room.
That's great. I know that probably this is something I should be better at. So I'm going to take your advice and maybe go try to write down some goals for myself. So, Kristen, do you have any other practice advice you would give people? Is there anything you do when you sit down behind the harp that works for you to stick to your goals?
Yeah, so the way I like to tackle practicing is kind of in the day that I sit down to see like, okay, what can I work on? What do I need to work on? So maybe if I didn't necessarily write anything down in my practice journal for the next practice day, because sometimes it happens, I like to do a check-in every day where I'm at in a piece of music. So as I believe many of us know, playing through an entire piece of music isn't necessarily practicing, it's more like playing. But if you do choose to do that, I think it's important to have a goal in mind. So for me, I like to just plow through a whole piece, just to be like, okay, where do I stand with this? Where are the tricky spots still if they're not fresh in my mind? And then I can kind of reassess that day of like, okay, like what do I want to work on and what do I feel like working on that day too? So Yeah, that's kind of like that's one little tip I can give.
That's great. I love that. Yeah, I find that for myself, it also really helps to just get a big picture of a piece by
Mhm.
playing it all the way through before
Mhm.
you kind of break it down into smaller parts. So
Mhm.
that's great. Thank you so much, Kristen. And I guess let's turn it over to Elizabeth Steiner. And I've had the privilege of knowing Elizabeth, who a lot of us call you Lizzie. Which do you
Yes.
go by these days?
Oh, everyone can call me Lizzie.
Lizzie, okay.
Yeah.
That's how I know you. So I've known Lizzie for quite a while as a colleague in Philadelphia, where Lizzie currently lives. And it's really amazing to see what you've done with your career, starting as a classically trained harpist. And then I think I looked on your bio today, and it looks like you've done some pretty diverse things from you played for Barbie the movie
Yeah.
at the Hollywood Bowl.
hmm
And you've performed at New York Fashion Week, and you've performed with Grammy winning recording artists and also the Philadelphia Orchestra. So your career is really kind of all over the map in what you've accomplished. And we featured Lizzie in our May June 2025 issue of Harp Column. So you can read more about her there. Lizzie, I know when we talked before we started that you do not keep a practice journal. And maybe you could give us some tips for how you still manage to stay on track. And is there anything you would recommend to people for just staying on track with the goals that they've set?
Yeah. And thanks so much for having me. This is so fun to be a part of. And Kristen, I'm a huge fan. And I have to shout out, I was just playing your arrangements at my tea gig. I have a tea gig for at a very
Amazing.
nice hotel, and the golden arrangement and the
Yes.
lovely Christmas, what is it? Christmas time. Simply having a wonderful
Oh,
Christmas time.
lovely.
The Beatles
Oh,
or
so
Paul
good.
McCartney, excuse me, was so
Yep.
huge hits. Literally all the parents were like, "Thank you for
Amazing.
playing Golden." And I was like, "I'm doing a harp column practice challenge with her." That wasn't
That's
relevant to
hilarious.
them.
I
But
love
I
it.
had to shout that out. So thank you so
Oh,
much for
thanks.
those. And I mean, it kind of goes back to like my point, which is that I wanted to share, which is that I like to mix classical and everything else. So I and I and to also circle back to your point, Kim, I do keep a journal, but not just for practicing. I try to every day I set three intentions. So most of those intentions have something to do with music. And I'll like set an intention for a good practice session, or to really like delve into something I need to work on, or maybe I just need to have a good rehearsal, right? So if I need to have a good rehearsal, I probably need to have a good practice session before that. So I do try to keep track in that way. Just uh, I have more of a life journaler than a practice journaler specifically. But for my practice routine, which I could definitely speak to, is always warm up, of course. Everyone has to have a warm up. And my warm up has been the same thing for years, which is literally single finger exercises. Yolanda Condenassis, my former teacher, has some great ones in her book, which is, I think, on playing the harp. And of course, I just play them off the top of my head. And all it really is just plucking single fingers, one string at a time, one finger at a time. I used to warm up really like trying to be impressive to myself or do like things that I thought would be, the correct, good little harpist way to do things. But I found that the more I broke it down into, I'm probably going to make a lot of food analogies, but bite sized chunks, it helped me a lot more to be actually warmed up to play larger swaths of notes and more complicated things. So I start really small, really mindfully, one hand at a time, just one note at a time. And that's like my zen space, my calm space of the day. And I can sometimes, I'll be honest, I'll just put on like a YouTube video on my stand. I'll totally be honest and just sort of zone out. But my body at this point knows like I can completely, I'm like locking into what I want to do for the day. And then I start with like, I guess I think of it as eating your vegetables, right? So I will typically warm up with like a Baroque or classical piece that I probably had to spend a lot of time learning in my earlier years, and something I want to keep in shape in my fingers just because basically. But I'll do like the Handel concerto or a Bach piece or Mozart flute and harp concerto, anything. There's something about that tradition for me, like knowing I'm like just reaching back in time and I'm, touching base with Bach or Mozart or whoever I need to honor, the practice gods, and just really like the music from that time period is so structural, and really I find it makes your fingers, it demands like, are my fingers evenly being addressed evenly? And then from there, after I've done my slow, careful, methodical, Baroque, classical, like kind of second phase warm up, then I'll go into whatever I want to need or want to work on that day. So then I can start to get to like, I guess that's like we have my appetizer and then my entree, and then I get, and for me, it's my dessert, right? So I'll do like my pop stuff, or, like a fun arrangement I'm working on, or lately I've been really doing a lot of stuff by ear. So I've been trying to every day then do like put on a song I like and I just learn it by ear. And that is still challenging, but it's like I've warmed up my brain, my fingers, and I know I can do all the stuff I used to have to do and probably still have to do, but I want to do something more experimental or something that requires even more creativity. And I find like kind of building that creativity in my day is exciting, and that definitely keeps me motivated.
That's amazing. There are so many nuggets of wisdom in everything you just said. I'm trying to remember everything, and it's hard. But thank you, Lizzie, for sharing that. Is there any other advice you would give people as they begin to embark on this challenge, either mentally or physically? Any specific technical things you do when you practice?
Yeah, someone said in the chat for the one finger exercises to do those slowly. Yeah, very slow, just like literally, I mean, the harp's right there, but I can go like pluck, pluck, very slow, like nothing, there's no desire to be fast. And especially with the Handel or Bach or whoever, um, whatever class, like kind of structural piece I'm working on, I go at least half tempo. So I'll have my handy metronome and I'll definitely, you know, whatever the tempo, the goal is, I'll go at half of that. That's always my baseline, if not slower. Like however slow the metronome can go, I go there. And I'd like to say I just hang out there. I hang out until I'm so comfortable that I can move it 10 clicks up. Um, and again, that was a technique I learned when preparing for orchestra auditions, right? You have to be so methodical and you want to be basically so good you can't mess it up. And just so comfortable, and it also relaxes your nervous system, your body, it makes you feel confident. And then once you click it up, and I do this for pop, jazz, any genre, anything I'm doing, you just go 10 clicks up and then you just hang out, chill out, like just imagine you're just there with no desire to get faster, because I find trying to push tempo too early will be really frustrating basically, and you'll learn things incorrectly. So that's always been my method. I stand by that. And then once you're at the tempo you want to be at, try other tempos. Try playing it slower with the metronome and without, or even faster and with the metronome and without. And push yourself to then when you really know something, you can play it at like almost any tempo and you'll internally be like, oh, this is about 70. Oh, this is about like 120, and knowing like you can start at any click marking on the metronome is like, that's when I'm like, I know this music.
That's great. I love that metronome advice. My colleague Susan Brady, I have to throw this in when you mentioned slow practicing. My colleague Susan Brady calls it sloud practicing, slow and loud, which I find very helpful too. Can I, Kristen, can I ask you if you have any particular warm up routines that you use or would recommend?
Yeah, every time I sit at the harp for the first time, I do the Salzedo conditioning exercises. And then I do a scale of scales. That's what I do every time. It's my basic warm up. If I take a little bit more time off than a day or two, like say a couple weeks off, I love what Lizzie was saying with like coming back to like the roots of like Baroque and classical. I have all these like classical little etudes that they're just very thorough. They work every finger, and I sit down and just sight read through that stuff. And I do it slow as well, just to make sure I'm like checking in with the technique and everything. But those also function as great warm-ups too. I would suggest finding something that is slightly below whatever level that you're at. That way you're not like hurting yourself trying to learn the music and you're focusing on like the notes and rhythms versus actual technique when you're warming up.
Yeah, great advice. We have a question in the chat. Somebody is asking, when I play at a fast tempo, my wrist starts to hurt, and wondering if it's related to technique or just that they're not used to playing at that tempo. Does anyone have
Do
a
this.
go
I
for
can
it,
answer
Kristen?
this. Yeah, I see this a lot. And the same thing happens to me too. Uh, it's going to be a technique thing. It's hard for me to answer without seeing your hand play. Generally, I feel like harps and specifically compared to all other instruments, it's so easy to become really tight when we're playing. There's just a lot of movements, it's the mechanics of like wrapping your finger around the string, bending it, and then releasing. It's different than say like a piano where you just like throw your finger on the key and it's there, right? So I see that a lot. I would I would start by doing a check-in with your technique when you're playing at a slow tempo and seeing if everything's a-okay at that tempo. Then I would gradually bring up, that's how I'd practice anyway. I would gradually bring up to tempo and like Lizzie was saying, like camp out at like whatever speed for a bit and make sure you're happy there and then like increase it. I like what I call the metronome game I play with myself and I teach it to my students. One click up if you get it right, one click down if you get it wrong, and you can play around with that, but you can be like, okay, it has to be 3 times in a row perfectly before you move it up a notch. But I would just to analyze your own self, if not from another teacher's perspective or another harpist perspective, I would try to record yourself, like video yourself. You don't have to post it anywhere, but just like take your phone out and record your hand, and just so you can have an outsider's eye of like what's going on with your hand, and then try play that same passage slow and see if you notice a difference comparing the technique. I have a feeling it would be the technique because like I can play fast stuff and my wrist doesn't hurt. It does get tired. It does get tired. And depending on what you play, it could also like aggravate your technique. Like it just shows like the weak spots of where there might be some tension being held. Yeah.
Great advice. Well, you guys have really shared a lot of wonderful thoughts for us to take with us going back into the challenge. And we just really appreciate so much you being here with us today. If anybody has any last minute questions, go ahead and throw them in the chat. And I wanted to remind you all, well, first of all, I wanted to say to everybody here, thank you so much for joining this year's practice challenge. When I looked the other day, we had over 700 people signed up. So that's really great. And I know that not everybody was able to get into our opening day kickoff party because we did have a limit. And if you missed that, you can still see it on YouTube. Liana, can you throw that link in the chat as well? And we'll be putting all of the subsequent events up there if you miss any of them. Let's see.
I see a
We
couple
have
questions about
Yeah.
technique.
we have somebody asking what helps you stay motivated to play. Sometimes I don't see any progress and it can be disheartening. Do either of you have any particular thoughts about staying motivated?
You want to go
Sometimes,
first?
yeah, you need to take a break, probably. I highly recommend, I mean, I love a practice challenge. I also am a big believer in 6 days on, the seventh day rest, uh, very important, especially if you're really going hard with it, like
Hmm.
the more, motivated, the more like, consistent you're being. Sometimes the best thing you can do for your body and your mind and your mental health is to stop. Go outside, go on a walk, or like, do another activity that you love, that's artistic, that motivates you, maybe, or go to a museum, or like listen to a beautiful piece of music. And that's, for me, is always some piece I'll hear and they'll be like, oh, I want to play that, or like, or I forgot about that piece and I love it, and maybe I can work on that next time. But
Hmm.
I'm so much better when I'm rested. And to speak to an injury, right? Another person mentioned that in the comments. I've had, yeah, wrist injuries, shoulder injuries. We've all had it. And
Yeah.
definitely rest. Like, there's the only way you can cure it is to take that time. But however, we are also musicians, we are athletes with our instruments. So what's the method that you can use to continue and make it sustainable? And I would also say, play quietly. Work on your sound production in a quiet, like really shaping a note and plucking very gently, but closing your fingers all the way. You can still get a beautiful sound, and you're
Hmm.
not really going for that loud, harsh sound, but you're just achieving this beautiful, rounded sound, and making sure it feels good to play, right? I always teach my students that. Um,
Hmm.
and that's generally going to come from closing fully flat, and then, no tension in the wrists. Try not to do like, sometimes, been taught like that. We don't want that, and we definitely don't want that, right? So just a nice flat, calm, call it a calm wrist, and then closing and play really, really quietly, like almost imagining like you're like trying not to wake a sleeping baby. Some of us might actually have that. I don't, but like really quietly, and you can still, you're still, those muscles are still firing. You're still developing your finger muscles, and you're getting your work in, but you're not straining your body.
I want to add to
Yeah.
that really quick. Helping you stay motivated, I would see, like Lizzie was saying, seek inspiration. Of course, outside of music, I'm a huge fan of that. I get out in nature, but also from other harpists. I mean, step one is already guys all showing up here. Like your colleagues, like join Facebook groups, watch videos. Um, Sometimes it's just being inspired by seeing other people play can help strive you to want greater things. Also, if you're not in lessons, honestly, even if it doesn't have to be a weekly lesson, just having a lesson with a harpist doesn't have to be the same person, could be like picking and choosing. It's also helpful because they will bring in new insights to your playing that you would have never thought of before. And that in itself is also motivating. I also wanted to speak really quickly on the comment about the 4-2-1 pattern. I'm assuming you're thinking like C, G, C, like kind of those like basic accompaniment type of patterns. Uh, it's difficult to say what might be happening with your technique without seeing your hand, but my advice would be practice it slow and making sure that you feel like every single finger is releasing and relaxing. Like I teach my students relax technique. I don't just teach full closure, I also teach close and then release. So I look for that close and then that little jiggle that happens at the end to make sure your fingers are truly relaxed after each pluck at the slower tempo. So then when you play it faster, it will also be there. Yeah,
Great
there was another
advice.
question here.
Yeah, we have a lot of technique questions. I think somebody else is curious to know what to do if they have some technique related issues, but have been playing that way for a long time. That's a tricky one if you've got kind of
Never too late to
ingrained.
change.
Yeah.
Never too late to, our technique always is changing. Even my own technique has changed throughout the year, and I'm actually personally going through a thumb redoing in my right hand. So like I think it's never too late to change. It's also never too late for lessons. There is no age gap. You can always go for one-off lessons. You can go back to weekly lessons. There's no shame in that.
Yeah, that's great. you really are never too old for lessons or even just playing for your colleagues to get their input. So you guys have given us some really great advice, and I can't thank you enough for being here and everybody else who showed up today. I wanted to remind you before we wrap it up that our next live event is next Monday, January 12th at noon Eastern Time. And we will have with us Kirsten Agresta and Joel von Lerber, who are two other harpists that we featured in interviews last year. So thank you all once again. I hope we see you next week. And thanks again to Kristan and Lizzie. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much for having us.
Happy New Year, everyone.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.